ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On our last two programs, we talked about the Psalms of the wilderness, the wilderness experience as given in the book of Numbers, and reiterated again in a prophetic allusion, shall we say, in Psalms 90 through 106. This is a tremendous story as we begin to uncover it. Gary Stimson is here to discuss with me the Psalms of the wilderness.
Psalms of the wilderness, 90 through 106, reflecting the events of the wilderness journey of Israel as recorded in the book of Numbers. In English, we call it the book of Numbers. In Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And it tells the story really in two parts. The first 10 chapters of Numbers speak of a census taken among the Israelites. And then chapters 11 and following speak of a curse or series of curses that befall the people, and then prophecies of the far future and a second numbering of the people. So that's really why it's called Numbers in English, I think, because the people were numbered.
The census in the opening chapters of the book of Numbers is made of the people who are over 20 years of age. And in 1967, in the 20th year of Israel, something happened which seemed to spark a recollection of this book of Numbers. In the Six-Day War, the Temple Mount was taken. It is possible that the Jews could have restored temple worship at that time. Had they done so, perhaps the Messiah would already be here. Perhaps we would have long been taken in the rapture. We do not know the sequence of events or what could have happened as we reflect upon 1967. But we do know that because of unbelief, the Israeli government chose to give control of the Temple Mount back to the Muslims. And it's as if God was saying, okay, you want to do that? You don't believe me? You don't want to set up the kingdom now? 40 more years. And this is our take on the thing. It appears that from 1967, for the next 40 years, Israel has been going through what is given in the book of Numbers during their 40-year wilderness experience.
J.R., we're now in the 30th year since 1967, and what have we seen? We've seen Israel exchanging peace for a mess of pottage, I guess you could say, for the glimmer of peace. They have made all kinds of secret deals with the leaders of Gentile governments worldwide in exchange for some millions of dollars in foreign aid and the promise of the free flow of oil at market prices and so forth and so on. They have ended up literally bartering away their sovereignty, and up until the death of Yitzhak Rabin, were in danger virtually of giving away the entire country. This is not God's plan for Israel.
You know, there are two reverse noons beginning in Numbers 10:35 and 11:1, and then 7 more reverse noons in Psalm 107. We feel that these 9 to get packaged together, these 9 backward noons, and by the way, the noon is the 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It means downfall. And the rabbis say when the noon is reversed or turned around backwards, called a noon menuzeret, it means that God is turning his back in judgment upon the wicked. Well, we've seen this, I think, since 1967. And it's possible then that the concluding 7 backward noons, God's ultimate judgment against Mystery Babylon and the Battle of Armageddon, could take place in Psalm 107, 40 chapters later.
That's right. And what do we see today? Israel's murmuring, complaining, backbiting, divided, and besieged on its perimeters by numbers of tribes that wish to totally destroy Israel. It's exactly the way it was back in the desert wandering days.
Yes. So by the time they got to Kadesh Barnea, they had no confidence in Moses, no confidence in the leadership, and the people just didn't have the will to go on in and take the land.
And that brings us to a man named Korah. Korah was a Levite, and apparently, J.R., he was a very persuasive speaker.
And you know, he saw this lack of leadership ability, and he saw his political opportunity to build a wedge between the people and Moses, and he set out to take control.
And by the way, he reminds us of the political chicanery that we've seen in modern Israel. Mm-hmm. You know, he had 250 of the top princes of Israel behind him. Not to mention, as we find out from the narrative, the whole of Israel eventually sided with him.
Yes. He even wanted to build his own temple and his own type of worship system.
Yes.
As opposed to the Levitical tabernacle. Even though he was a member of the tribe of Levi, it just sort of smacks of the Antichrist somewhat, you know?
And by the way, Numbers offers us many types of the Antichrist.
Yes, it does.
Not just Korah.
That's right. Now, what Moses wrote about in the book of Numbers seems to be a testing of the wills. And I think that's what we're seeing in Israel today. You know, the Temple Mount Faithful, the Gush Emunim, the Temple Institute, they're all continuing to prepare for the rebuilding of the temple. But the Israeli government continues to stiff-arm them and placate the Muslim presence.
Even as we make this program today, we happen to be at the time of Tabernacles, 1997, and Gershon Solomon, who has tried to place a cornerstone on the Temple Mount year after year and has been stopped by the government, has sworn that in this season he's going to try it again because he feels that the Lord many years ago instructed him to rebuild the temple. In fact, it was in 1967. J.R., when Korah opened his mouth against Moses, he said, in effect, you think you're so hot. You've brought us out here in the wilderness. We're dying. We're thirsty. You've given us problems. We're unable to fight our enemies. And he says that now, as in verse 13 of chapter 16 in Numbers, he said, you want to make yourself altogether a prince over us. He wasn't buying that. And he set himself up as prince, basically.
And fell under the judgment of God. I think that sort of bickering is going on in Israel today. The next thing we see is in chapter 19 of Numbers. It is the ordinance of the red heifer. And Gary, I think we're seeing that also being fulfilled today.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, after 2,000 years, there has been a red heifer born in Israel. Melody is just over a year old now, and having entered her second year, next year about this time, entering her third year, she could become the 10th red heifer in history to be sacrificed. So this story of the red heifer here may be being fulfilled today in this new red heifer that's been born in Israel for the first time in 2 millennia.
And rabbinic leadership in Israel is playing it very close to the chest on this one because there's a key issue involved. Not just a red heifer, but the waters of purification. Meaning that if those waters are available, and it takes the ashes of the red heifer to make the waters, then temple worship could begin once again. So they're getting ready.
Yes. Then we come to the story in chapter 20 of striking the rock again. You know, Moses struck the rock the first time at the request of God. But then God said, Moses, this time I want you to just speak to the rock. The rock, of course, is typical of the Lord Jesus Christ. When he came the first time 2,000 years ago, he was smitten, publicly humiliated. Well, will there be another striking of the rock in this generation? Let's talk about Knesset Bill 174C, Gary. That would be another humiliation of Christ.
I don't have a copy of the bill in front of me, but essentially, this bill would make it a crime, punishable by a year in prison, to possess, to reproduce, to share, to import, or to distribute religious literature that has an evangelistic character. Meaning, no more talking about Jesus in the streets of Jerusalem, or Haifa, or Tel Aviv.
And it's the Orthodox Jews that are pushing this bill through the Knesset.
They are. And if this isn't striking the rock, I don't know what is.
It's amazing, isn't it? And then there's the never forgiven sin of Edom in chapter 20 as well. This is the time when Moses asked the king of Edom if he could just go through their land, and he said no. Is it possible, Gary, that Israel will request permission to enter Palestinian-controlled land in order to search out the Hamas, and Arafat could say, no, don't you come in my territory?
Even as we speak, J.R., there's a news item that has to do with the Mossad's attempt to wipe out certain terrorists before they can do their evil work, and the world has spoken out against that rather vigorously. You know, the Edomites are the perpetual enemies of Israel. And, for example, in Psalm 137, verse 7, we have, "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof." The Edomites have always wanted their temples destroyed.
And we may be there today in fulfillment of this crazy thing. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Don't go away. Edom was the perpetual enemy of Israel, the offspring of Esau, twin brother of Jacob. And they fought from the womb itself until this very day. You know, we can see the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis today, and it certainly has a lot of parallel with that ancient feud.
Yeah, it really does. And it's interesting that today's Palestinians are supported by the global system. Oslo and Madrid, the leaders of Europe, the United States State Department tend to play favoritisms of various kinds with the PLO. And in Psalm 137, which we just read before the break, in which Edom said, when the temple was being destroyed, just strip it bare to the ground, the very next verse says, "O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us." Edom is seen here in league with the daughter of Babylon, which would be the Gentile nations of the world. And we have that exact thing happening in Israel today, J.R. Edom is not going to do Israel any favors at all.
And it appears that the present conflict or confrontations between Yasser Arafat and Benjamin Netanyahu are at least reflective of the problems that Moses had with the king of Edom. Yeah. Is this the only fulfillment of Edom's unforgivable sin, their unforgiven hatred of Israel, or does something far worse lie just ahead in the future? There is that possibility. Let's back up for just a moment about, let's talk again about Korah and his 250 of Israel's princes, the finest of the families of Israel. They stood up against Moses and they were destroyed. Korah in the earthquake and the 250 princes by a fire sent from heaven.
Yeah.
Could that have modern fulfillment?
Well, J.R., there's a great deal of talk in the news these days concerning nuclear weapons. And specifically, it is now known that 84 suitcase-sized nuclear weapons are at least partly in the hands of Arab terrorists. And if God allowed those to be set off, you know, we're talking about fire from heaven, for sure. And something pretty fierce could happen that could rearrange the power structures in the Middle East.
Fire from heaven, it's the same kind of fire that fuels the sun. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the same kind of fire that fuels the sun, nuclear fire. Yes. And 84 suitcase-sized nuclear weapons are floating around somewhere. And you know the proclivity of terrorists is to set off whatever they possess.
And willing to die in the process.
Sure.
So instead of having a bunch of plastic explosives strapped to his chest, he could just be carrying a suitcase with a nuclear weapon in it and give praise to Allah and snap, there it go.
There goes the bomb.
There goes the bomb.
And we have here...
What, before the Israeli Knesset, maybe?
Who knows? That would be a real feather in their cap. They certainly wouldn't want to blow up anything on the Temple Mount because they own that.
Yes.
But you know, when Korah was taken in, as the earth opened up and then swallowed him, fire comes from heaven, destroys those 250 men that offer incense. We're talking about 250 political types here. Let's call them religious liberals and perhaps their followers, their lackeys, their cronies. We see a parallel in modern Israel.
Wow. In chapter 20 of Numbers, we also have the deaths of Miriam and Aaron. You recall, those are that's the brother, and Aaron is the brother, Miriam the sister of Moses. And they complained against Moses because he had married an Ethiopian wife in Numbers chapter 12. Here in chapter 20, they die. And I wonder if perhaps this could have its prophetic fulfillment in others who have also created internal strife in Israeli politics. Perhaps they may yet fall under the judgment of God. For that matter, all who were over 20 years of age in 1967 may not live to see the kingdom established. That's an awesome possibility.
J.R., we know that there will be a godly remnant in Israel, numbered and sealed right at the beginning of the tribulation period. About other Israelis, we know very little. There are many Israelis, in fact, the vast majority today are not observant Jews. They are not faithful.
Yes. Now, at this point, we have covered a great number of chapters in the book of Numbers, and which appear to be clearly under fulfillment today. The future chapters, we can only speculate. We're going to give you what we feel is our scenario and the possibility of where they might be fulfilled, but not knowing the future, we can only speculate. But we're certain of this: the wilderness journey given in the book of Numbers offers a glimpse into Israel's immediate future. So let's talk about the brazen serpent for just a moment, Gary. This brazen serpent in chapter 21 appears to be a replica of the serpents that were biting the people and they were dying because of the snake bite. What kind of modern fulfillment do you suppose we could see in this serpent, and then the brazen serpent lifted up in order to become their salvation?
And this happens in the 21st chapter of Numbers, right after Israel has a victory over the Canaanites, which I think is fascinating, because after that victory, the people are still complaining. Along come the serpents. Sarah, the serpent is definitely a type of that event, which later became totally fulfilled when Jesus was placed up on the cross.
Yes, John chapter 3.
John chapter 3. And so, this serpent may refer to some kind of spiritual event in the land.
Yeah. Well, you know, Bill 174C could backfire on the religious community. It could create a result of massive conversions of the Jews to Jesus rather than his public humiliation. Because you've got to understand that Christianity has always grown under fire.
That's
it's
true.
Always helped it to be persecuted.
I know there are a lot of Israelis today who feel that Christians are their close friends, and in many cases their only supporters. And this bill could produce a backlash, and we hear today about many, many, shall we call them, secret conversions in Israel.
That's right. On the other hand, this bite of the serpent has long been a colloquialism for usury. Is it possible then that we have a prophetic implication in the coming mark of the beast, Mystery Babylon's mark of the beast, and this bite of the serpent?
Yeah, we can't say. We don't know, but there is to be. Perhaps that servant has a almost a double nature. One side of it perhaps speaks of the work of the Lord on the cross. The other side of it speaks of false religion, maybe the Antichrist, and we really don't know. The people tried to worship that serpent at one point, and it was destroyed.
Yes. Now there are military victories in the book of Numbers. Chapter 21 tells of the king of Arad who fights against Israel and takes some captives. Then we are told of the battle of Sihon, against Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and against Og, the king of Bashan. And Gary, it seemed significant to me that Israel always wins their battles ever since 1948. Just as they win against these three kings.
That's right, and these are no ordinary kings. These are powerful, well-armed, very wealthy kings, and in the case of Og, we're talking about a giant here.
Yes.
And the people who lived in the country that's today eastern Lebanon and northern Syria were known as the giants who constructed those giant buildings in the Bekaa Valley that still exist today.
Yes. Well, you know, Arad was of the south, and Og of the north, and the Sihon of the east, and so Israel is sort of surrounded here. And to me, this may reflect upon a battle in the future, like Og, the king of Bashan. It may be Damascus, you see, in Syria.
It reminds us of Isaiah 17, doesn't it?
Yes, over the Golan Heights. And it's possible that this will erupt finally in the battle of Gog and Magog. So we may be seeing in this 21st chapter here of Numbers, the battle of Gog and Magog under development. And so we've got these fascinating things in the book of Numbers that we may not be able to put our finger on what's going to happen in the future, but we have already showed you what has happened in the past, and we appear to be in the wilderness experience today. We'll be back in just a moment. On our last three programs, we've been going through the book of Numbers and showing you a wonderful overview of modern Israel, foretold in the stories of the book of Numbers. And Gary, the next one on our next program is really going to be a tremendous picture of the Antichrist.
Really, Balaam is a man gifted spiritually. He's a prophet for hire. And you know what's fascinating about Balaam, J.R., is that his sole mission is to spiritually subvert the people and to get them to follow him into a new vision of peace and prosperity and so forth. And there's somebody on the horizon who's going to try that in the near future.
Absolutely. So don't miss our next program. I think you'll really enjoy it. This is J.R. Church and Gary Stearman. Until then, keep looking up.